Jen, do you have a favorite fruit?
Bananas. I freaking love anything that's banana.
That's so legit. I love bananas too. I have been obsessed with bananas ever since I got back from Japan because they have this thing called banana milk.
Oh, yes.
It sends me over the edge. And funny enough, today we're going to be talking about bananas and pineapples and
Oh,
Barbie pineapples. But how does this all tie in and why is this on this channel where we talk about true crime and true events? That's because the banana and pineapple industry is really not the best. Bananas and pineapples go deep, and we're going to get into it today. I saw firsthand when I went to Costa Rica more recently, and it's globally renowned for its slogan Pura Vida, which means like pure life, but basically it's kind of like their finger guns, like it's what they use for saying thank you, hello, goodbye. It's just Pura Vida. And most of Costa Rica is all about environmental conservation. You know, you think of Costa Rica, you think the environment of Jurassic Park. It's lush, it's full of life. There's so much biodiversity. There's clouds, forests, and untouched jungles. But behind this image, there's a stark and really upsetting economic reality that's being driven by these intense agricultural corporate powerhouses, particularly regarding the exact thing of bananas and pineapples. And oftentimes, these fields will be hidden far, far away from the resorts, far, far away from any time these tourists are going to go out, and they destroy so much of the jungle as it is a massive export for the country. However, it's such an environmental hit and it has a deep conflict with the people of the land, which we're going to get into today. But before we go, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Kira, and with me is Jen. In our podcast, Decomposing Flower, we discuss true crime and true event cases, or particularly anything that we find interesting. This one it hits home because I was there and I saw firsthand what it does to the people, which is why I think it's so important to bring up today. So, with that being said, we will be talking a little bit about there is some murder and just like corruption that happens in today and what's going on down there. So if you're not ready for that, go ahead, check out another one of our episodes. But this episode is really important and I would highly suggest giving it a listen, or you can also find support down below. With all that being said, let's get into today's case. So, a massive part of the Costa Rican economy is at least 18% of these shipments. Within the sector, the total kind of crops are pineapples and banana. Pineapple stands as the single most important agricultural export, comprising of 37% of these shipments, while bananas follow at a close 33%. Costa Rica is also known for their coffee bean, just to throw out some more facts out there
hmm
for you. But these two fruits collectively represent two-thirds of the country's agricultural export value, which is huge to keeping the country running. The focus is on these large-scale, high-yield productions, but this also brings into the sphere as there's so much jungle and rainforest and biodiversity that in order to keep these crops going as high yield as possible, Costa Rica maintains one of the highest intensities of pesticide use in the world per hectare of cultivated land, which is really not good for the environment. But to understand the current issues that I have with particularly how the banana and pineapple industry is run, we must go back to the late 19th century and the rise of the United Fruit Company. And they go by UFCO. And it's crazy. So this corporation historically was known as Al Polpo, which is known as the octopus, for its vast and far-reaching influence. And it laid the foundational imprint for the extraction happening in the region today. The company's history in Costa Rica began in 1871 when U.S. railroad entrepreneur Henry Migas, hopefully I pronounced that right, secured a contract to build a railway connecting the capital of San Jose to the port of Limon on the Caribbean coast. This infrastructure project soon became intertwined with the idea of banana trading. By the early and mid 20th century, UFCO was flourishing. It controlled vast territories, transportation networks, and it had a kind of monopoly, total monopoly in certain regions, to be honest. These regions, including Costa Rica, Honduras, and Guatemala, became known as the Banana Republics. The historical presence of UFCO, which eventually evolves through mergers into present-day brands known as Chiquita, Del Monte, basically all of the bananas that we get in the Western world, they're not the good kinds, which is so sad because I really try every single time I go out to get bananas to make sure that I'm trying to find bananas without these labels on them, as I really don't want to support these organizations. But we'll get into that because right now it just sounds like I'm like slapping on these brands, but there's a reason for it. They had a lasting effect on the economic and political development of several of these nations, especially as they're beginning to blossom. Particularly, they had a huge political impact, as if one person rose to power and they were like the prime minister or just like a local leader, and they wanted to, i.e., stop something as much as like pesticide use, that's a no-no. They would get slapped, they would get taken out of power, or like we'll talk about, there's some murder that gets involved.
Oh.
So, this historical background is essential to know as we move into today's case because of the dominance of the banana and pineapple exports. It shows that it's still deeply rooted in the society. Oh, and I forgot to mention its competitor, like the standard fruit company Dole, are also have their talons kind of placed in there. So it's really important for Costa Rica's export success that it is a large-scale, high-input monoculture. And monoculture is the repeated planting of a single plant species in a large area over multiple seasons, and it is intensely dependent on high applications of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides to achieve and sustain the high yields demanded by the international markets. Because if you're thinking, you're trying to supply all of the Western North Americas with bananas and pineapples. And that's a huge demand if you're thinking about it. Imagine
Mm-hmm.
that put into the rainforest and in these cultures. That's huge. And when I was walking in Costa Rica, no word of a lie, these things are huge. They're massive. And I was doing a lot of backpacking at the time. So it would be like I would be walking in the forest, doing my own thing. Not really walking because there's snakes and stuff. I was on a bus. But it would be just acres and acres and acres of bananas and pineapples. And
What?
especially for the animals, it's really detrimental because you have all these creatures that are trying to survive, but they're getting their habitat stolen more and more every single day. And especially for the workers too. Like you have snakes who are just trying to live and survive. But I'll show you some pictures of how, especially pit vipers, they're very well known for being a problem, especially in these plantations, as they blend in so well and they're so teeny tiny. But a bite from these in these remote places is not good. And it's not good for the workers. It's probably not good for the snake because that snake's going to die. Good news for Costa Rica, not good news for like a remote worker. They are one of the top exporters of anti-venom in the world.
Oh, wow.
But let me get back to, and medium-sized producers are compelled to sell or lease their land to these large-scale workers as basic farming or small scale pineapple operations are just less profitable and are eventually streamlined into these large scale farms. This economic pressure translates directly into the disappearance of small producers and corresponding increase in wage labor and temporary work on larger farms. The percentage of agricultural worker families in the country notably has decreased from 20% to 11%. A lot of the time when I'm down there, and what I was told is that not a lot of Costa Ricans tend to work on these plantations, but they get a lot of people from surrounding nations like Nicaragua. They'll get them to come from there and they pay them significantly less. But as long as they're getting paid, it's okay because back home there's not a lot of jobs. And a lot of the mega corporations like Chiquita or Del Monte or the other one that I can't remember at the particular moment, they'll go on to say, yeah, I guess we don't pay them a lot, but they're still getting paid, right? So it's still good. And we provide them housing. But let me tell you, when I was in the bus and driving along and looking at these plantations, it was deplorable, the conditions that these people had to live in. When I was driving by these houses, the houses were incredibly derelict. They had no furniture oftentimes, and there's only a mattress. And there'd be so many people stuck in one little house.
Oh.
And the way they transport these bananas, I will put a video up. If you're part of our YouTube audience, you'll be able to see. But what you're seeing is there is this giant yellow gate that comes down and barricades the road. Typically, this is something that they don't really want you to take pictures of or anything, but here you go. And it'll close off the road and it connects one rail to another on the other side of the road. And what you're going to see is that there's a rope attached to the first banana, but there's just kind of a string of bananas. And they have to go across the road running. Like the whole time these people are running. And there's at least 37 of those bunches of bananas attached to this man. And it's just on a tiny little string. It's a hard belt, not a harness, and there's no padding on it, as he has to run all day in the sun, bringing these bananas from one place to another and risking his life from snake bites or anything, trying to provide for his family. But it's just so sad because this is the only way that they can survive, or at least that's how they feel. A lot of these brands prior to this, they have rebranded, quote unquote, changed things. But, the technology has evolved so far that not having padding on these little belts or having a harness or proper workplace safety, like long term for this person, he's not going to be able to do this his entire life. Or if he does, he's going to be in severe pain. They can do better. These are mega corporations I'm talking about. They need to do better. And we see the same thing for the pineapple. It's so sad to see because this is the reality of the workers. The expansion of pineapple cultivation specifically has been noted for displacing small farmers and farms, especially when they're not directly involved in the industry. And particularly, there has been expansions into new regions because it has been favored by durable and sweet varieties like the MD2. And a lot of the Costa Rican people are actually not allowed to eat certain kind of pineapple. There was this trend going on in TikTok called the Barbie pineapple. And it's basically just a pineapple that was pink. But it was crazy viral. People are like, oh my gosh, I found the new, it's like a little labubu. As you're pulling out this pineapple, you're like, oh my God, it's pink. And it's like an extra $5. But the people down in Costa Rica actually aren't allowed to farm or eat these pink pineapples. Like, it's a heavy fine. It's illegal, as they have trademarked the pink pineapple, which is just ridiculous.
Wait, Barbie trademarked them or just
The fruit companies have trademarked.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry, herself.
I was like, Barbie did that? That is crazy though.
Like I was saying, The dependence on these high yields make the banana and pineapple industries heavily reliant on chemical inputs. Banana plants in particular are susceptible to numerous illnesses and blights, leading to immense and regular application of chemicals across the growth cycle. Costa Rica's agricultural system involves a staggering intensity of pesticide use, averaging over 25 kilograms applied per hectare of cultivated land, which positions the country among the world's highest rates of chemical application. Many of these pesticides deployed are classified as highly hazardous pesticides, which pose serious threats to public health and the environment. When they were testing, they found diazon, hopefully I pronounced that right. It's an insecticide linked to dizziness, nausea, and a nervous system damage. And despite being banned in Europe since 2006, it remains in use in Costa Rican agriculture. An incident on a pineapple farm in, Aguas Zarcon in San Carlos saw 15 workers requiring urgent medical treatment after prolonged exposure to this pesticide, highlighting the acute danger posed by these compounds and danger for the workers. As they go in there with no equipment, no whatsoever, they go in with flip-flops and shorts. There's also paraquat and carbenofuran. Oh, geez. These are moderate to highly toxic pesticides, which are widely utilized across these operations. They're proven to be respiratory irritants. Whew, those are big words. But this reliance on severe chemical pesticides expose huge risk to the environment as well. And this also brings into effect their water. Surprisingly, Costa Rica is one of the few places where you can actually drink the tap water, especially in Latin America. It's very widely known not to drink the water down there, unless you go on the Caribbean side. In that case, you can't drink the water no more. But despite Costa Rica's policies aimed at maintaining this water quality, the implementation has been proven insufficient. The country is now facing a grim water quality crisis stemming from the combination of inadequate sewage treatment, overusage of septic tanks, and the large quantities of these chemicals. They produce runoff, toxic pollutants, including pesticides and heavy metals into surface water bodies, and groundwater. Serious contamination has been documented in vital water sources, including rivers, wells, groundwater, coastal areas, and triggering mass killings of fish and other aquatic life. The consequences are direct and severe for human communities. The polluted water compromise public health, leading to immediate issues like diarrhea, cholera, and long-term health effects such as kidney damage, which not good. Historically, the country has recorded an average of 100 fatal poisonings per year, alongside over 200 acute poisoning cases, which is just insane that they're not changing anything. More recently, there has been more rules in Costa Rica saying that you can't use pesticides, you can't do that. When I was there, they were flying over like probably every 20 minutes with planes of just pesticides, which is horrifying because it's something that they shouldn't be doing, but they just continue to do it anyways because the government can't do anything against them. That's how deep these things go. And I'll get into why they don't do anything in a moment here. They did a water test last year and found still traces of these chemicals. So they're still using the amounts. They're still using these chemicals. They might just be using it a little bit less, but it's still there. The soil itself has a big problem as well. The repeated growth of this single crop extracts the same nutrients, leading to soil depletion and rendering the land more vulnerable to erosion. Extensive chemical application alters the balance of ecosystems, harming microorganisms, insects, and other species vital to the soil health. the worms are dying and they just can't continue to live here, especially if you're pouring pesticides all over the floor. And studies in Limon show that conservation of native rainforests to banana and pineapple monoculture has led to reductions in biodiversity and soil quality. Specifically, both banana and pineapple monocultures exhibit less favorable physical and soil characteristics compared to organic cacao forestry or native forests. Monocultures display higher bulk density, which is a sign that it's not healthy soil, and it has a low organic carbon content, which is directly related to how viable the soil is. So it's not very good in the long run for things to happen this way. The majority of workers in the Costa Rican pineapple industry are, like I said, poor migrants who depend on this labor for survival. So the long-term health consequences for working on these plantations is definitely linked to the consistent use of pesticides, because they'll just go over all these people who are working in the fields and they'll get conditions like headaches and nausea, to severe chronic conditions including cancer, neurological damage, and endocrine disruption. The history of the banana industry tragically includes widespread male worker sterilization from the use of pesticides, which is DBCP. This pattern of chemical exposure is illustrating just how low they're willing to go to get the cheapest possible fruit exports. But that's not the ultimate kind of cost that they have done so far. It gets even more disgusting. So the cost of all of this expansion, and they do this thing called land theft. And I'm going to tell you the story of the Biribiri chief, Sergio Rojas Ortiz. There was, I'm not going to come for Costa Rica, but there was a huge failure of the Costa Rican state to uphold its own foundational legislation. In 1977, Costa Rica passed the landmark Indigenous Law, which declared the country's 24 indigenous territories, which covered approximately just 7% of the national territory, to be inalienable. Jeez, this is a hard word for me to pronounce. And reserved exclusively just for these indigenous communities that inhabit them. They live on these lands. They use these lands. It's not like they're on vacation in Maui, just chilling. No, they live and work and they rely on the land in order to survive here. The law was formally set for these lands for restoration for their rightful owners. Despite this legal framework, the law remains largely unimplemented, and it's been almost half a century. In practice, non-indigenous occupants, oftentimes powerful ranchers or these large-scale farmers, invade vast portions of this legally titled land. During the night, what they'll do is they'll walk into the forest, cut down the trees. In the morning, the indigenous people will wake and more of the forest is gone. There's more pineapples or there's more bananas where their land used to be.
That's fucked.
It really is. So the local indigenous community wasn't just going to stand for this, which leads us into one of the sadder moments of today. Sergio Ortiz, a revered Birigiri leader of the Salteri territory, became a central figure in this movement. Sergio served as the legal and political coordinator for this whole movement. It was really huge, and his primary focus was leading the struggle to reclaim ancestral lands from non-indigenous settlers to defend his people's rights, which was already set by the Costa Rican government. He just wanted the land. He just wanted to protect his people's well-being, their cattle, their industrial, their traditional lands, and the forests. And it's so important to raise awareness about what's going on. And he was doing this national, international, trying to help communities organize their own land reclamation processes. Hopefully I pronounced that right. This unwavering struggle made him a target. For years, Sergio faced death threats, physical assaults, and regulatory litigation. The severity of this conflict internationally was recognized in 2015 when the Inter-America Commission on Human Rights, which sounds huge, ordered the Costa Rican government to take steps to protect the lives and physical integrity of the Biribi and Boran people. The government was repeatedly warned that their inaction would lead to deaths, and they weren't wrong. The warnings were tragically correct. On the night of March 18th, 2019, Sergio was alone in his home in Neri, within the indigenous territory of Satari. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Just hours before he demonstrated his commitment by accompanying community members to the public prosecutor's office to address ongoing land disputes. At approximately 9:15, an armed assailant entered the back of Sergio's home. Neighbors reported hearing 15 gunshots. Sergio, at the age of 59, died from multiple gunshot wounds. The response to the assassination highlighted the state's failure. Neighbors called 911, but the police took over an hour to arrive, which tragically was too late. The aftermath of his murder has been defined by state impunity. The UN and international human rights experts condemned the killing immediately, demanding the authorities identify all involved and bring them to justice. Despite these demands, justice has been denied. In a devastating turn for the Biribiri community, the Costa Rican justice system dismissed the criminal case in January of 2004. The prosecutor's office cited the environment, the way of life in the area, and the impossibility of locating any of the witnesses. It's just not gonna fly, babe. We gotta file this case, put it away. So there's no justice. But I'm not surprised after all the stands he was making against these huge organizations, if it wasn't, someone from there or someone who had hired an assassin, he'd been facing death threats for years. The UN expressed profound regret over the filing and viewed with concern the lack of investigation and the failure to provide sufficient and solid elements for prosecution. They didn't look into his case at all. And this just brought about further violence. Less than a year later, in February 2020, Boran leader Sergi Riviera was killed in the Terabera indigenous territory. This murder, which occurred during a land reclamation effort, was further evidence that there is violence against these indigenous land defenders, and it's only escalating. The systemic failure to implement and protect the 1977 Indigenous law only shows just how much say that these corporations have over the Costa Rican government and how the state is failing to protect the citizens and people by not going after their murders and, being like, yeah, that's so great that you're doing these things to protect the environment. And yeah, you can go ahead and bring another plane of pesticides through. That's fine, which is so sad. The continued dominance of these high input monocultures, despite the documented social and environmental costs, is carefully maintained through political strategy. This approach has been termed environmental populism, where a government negotiates trade agreements and supports the expansion of crops like pineapple, which contributes $1.3 billion to the national economy, while they claim to nature protection. First, they tell about the importance of their industry as far as the economic growth and job creation. And secondly, it manages how upset the public is. Of course, the public is not going to be happy with as far as the environmental damage and conflicts that made the expansion possible. But with the practice of the court and police forces under their hands, they can repress community and worker protests. And long term, this has been happening for a while. consumers in the United States and Europe are increasing the demand in sustainable and traceable products, which is good, which leads to growing labels like Global Gap and Fair Trade, which exposes the chemical intensive kind of model that's already existing. And the current practices can't continue to satisfy these global demands, especially considering how much the environment is not doing well. It's not helping our sustainability, and the social costs for people are way too high. The narrative of the pineapple and banana industries in Costa Rica is profoundly upsetting, I would say. The global consumer expects a bright, unblemished fruit. You want your banana green, not quite brown, that perfect, unripened, just about to hit the perfect yellow. And that's what they expect. There shouldn't be any damage on the fruit. We don't want any bruises. And the system delivers it at the cost of contaminated water, chronic illness, stolen ancestral lands, and murders of people who are trying to make a difference. The challenge for Costa Rica and the international community is to recognize that these fruits carry a cost that is far too high. It is not worth the 67 cents that you have to pay in the store, because that's less than what this employee is probably getting out of it. There is a serious human and ecological toll that demands immediate transformation and justice. With that being said, that's where I'm going to leave it for today. But please let us know what you think in the comments down below. Like I said, there is support in the group, there is support in the description box of our YouTube on this video if you want to check it out. Just something to help support the ecological environment in Costa Rica. We also have a Google form if you want to suggest any cases, but that's where we're at in today's case. It's a bit of a heavy one, and especially it has a lot of heavy subject matter, I would say. But that's it. Everything isn't pura vida in Costa Rica. And we'll see you in the next episode.